Hello everyone! In this video tutorial, I'm going to go over how to paint fairy wings. I have the figure painted in already and the background is mostly completed. To start, I'm going to fill in the basic form of the wings using a 1/8 inch angled shader brush with Caribbean blue paint. I'm just lightly buffing in the pigment right now. I like how Old Holland paints are pigmented, but still glide really smoothly onto my surface. When looking for a quality oil paint, it's important to me to find one that squeezes the pigment onto my palette without a bunch of excess oil leaking out of the tube. If the paint is too thin, it's harder to get these even, transparent layers. I like how you can still see some of the foliage behind the wing showing through. I'm starting with the wing on the left so I don't accidentally smudge the one on the right when I start detailing it. Next, I'm going to see how a little nickel titanium yellow looks with the Caribbean blue. I'm going to dab it really lightly just to see how it looks. I still have the Caribbean blue on my brush, so the effect is very subtle. Let's get a little more pigment onto the brush and see how that looks. I like how bold this pigment looks against the blue. Plus, the yellow mixes with the blue to give it a really nice turquoise color. I'm going to follow the outside perimeter of the wing, lightly dabbing the paint on because I don't want to lift up my initial blue layer. I like how the stray hairs on this frayed brush give the wing texture. It already looks like the light is reflecting on the little individual cells that make up the wing. I like how the tip of the wing is brighter because it stands out against the surrounding foliage. I'm lightly softening everything I just put down. I want to build up my layers as I go, starting with blurry out-of-focus shapes and gradually building up to sharper detail using a smaller brush. This wing is going to act as a template for the next one. I'm going to have to remember my steps so they look the same in the end. One benefit to working this way is that if I don't like the end result, it won't be as heartbreaking to wipe off what I've painted so far and try again. Next, I'm taking some titanium white and using my brush, I'm going to follow along with how I think the veins in the wing would run. I have a little reference photo of a wing I found in my backyard. This wing is more beetle-like, but it's still nice to have one on hand for reference. I want the wing I'm painting to be a bit more delicate. I'm just going to keep dabbing in my lines. I like how some areas are showing up brighter than others. It makes it seem like the individual cells are reflecting light differently. So now I think I'm ready to finally switch brushes to my 00 pointed round and start adding some of the sharper details. The first thing I'm going to do is just add a highlight along the top, just to test the brightness of the pigment. I'm still using titanium white, but I've thinned it slightly with walnut oil. I dip the tip of my brush into a drop of it, just so I get a nice sharp line. You really don't need a lot. If you add too much, your line will be too thick. If I would have thinned my pigment for the base layers, like when I added my Caribbean blue, I would have a little more trouble adding these details. The layers below would start lifting with this sharp pointed brush. I also don't want completely smooth and unbroken lines. This wing is textured almost like how the veins and cells in a leaf are, and I want the light to appear as if it's hitting these surfaces and bouncing and reflecting. If I zoom in on my reference photo, you can see what I mean. Little pinpoints of light are being reflected in different ways. In this photo, you can also see different colors in the highlights. I see a lot of pinks and yellows. Since our wing is blue, we'll do yellows and teals for the highlights. I love how much dimension the wing is getting already. I just want to carefully keep adding my lines using my detail brush. My pigment is mixing slightly with the layers below to give the titanium white a more interesting effect. I can see my nickel titanium yellow pigment being pulled forward, and my Caribbean blue. It's one of my favorite things about oil paint, how you can layer the paint and get so many interesting effects. I'm going to go ahead and clean up these edges as well. It's important that the wing stands apart from the background. For now, I think I've taken this wing to a level of finish I'm comfortable with at the moment. I'm happy enough with it at this stage that I'm going to go ahead and copy this same method that I used here onto the next wing. So just like I did before, I'm going to fill in the basic form of the wing using my 1/8 inch angled shader brush with Caribbean blue paint. And once again, I'm not thinning the paint with anything at the moment. This is just straight pigment. I'm just lightly buffing the paint directly onto the board. This wing is larger, so it's going to take a bit longer to fill in the area. But I feel more confident since I've already done this process once. I'm going to make the base of the wing have a bit of a brighter blue by using a little bit of titanium white in with the Caribbean blue. I'm going to blend that until it has a smooth transition. And on the outside edge, just like before, I'm using some nickel titanium yellow that has been mixed in with the blue. And I'm just going to dab that along the top and outer edges until it's blended. And now I'm ready to start dabbing in the wing cells. I'm using the same brush, but I've added in some more nickel titanium yellow. I just love how this brush makes this texture so effortlessly. It's always nice when you can get your brush to do some of the heavy lifting for you. This makes my life much easier. You can see where I added the titanium white at the base of the wing, how the nickel titanium yellow is mixing with that and the Caribbean blue to give a nice pastel color. And then as I work my way up, the color starts to transition to a more cool-toned yellow. I'm just going to keep working my way up, keeping in mind the direction that I want for these little cells to go. It's just a lot of dabbing to fill in this whole space. It's okay to be a bit messy. I know that I can sharpen the details once I switch back to my pointed round brush again. I really just want to get this down onto the board. One thing that is different between this wing and the last one is that the larger vein on the outside edge is more visible here. I'm going to use some Caribbean blue and titanium white to highlight this area. I want it to seem like it's raised up higher than the rest of the wing. I'm going to switch to my 00 pointed round brush to really emphasize this highlight. Now I can move on and start detailing these little veins. I'm just going to follow along with the patterns that I have already put down. and try to pull the ridges forward. I can use my angled shader to dab back any areas that seem too bright. If we look at the reference again, you'll see that the wings are divided into sections with the larger veins. I'm not going to be as dramatic in this painting since I feel like this type of wing would be a little heavy here, but I can still apply a similar principle. I'm going to have some thicker veins that support the smaller cells. Just like before, I'm still using titanium white, but I have thinned it slightly with walnut oil. I have a dropper that I use to put a single drop of walnut oil onto my palette. I just want to wet the very tip of my brush so that I get a nice sharp line. I've been using this beetle wing as reference for the type of lighting I want, but I actually have a whole library of photos and videos of different insects that I've come across. The shape of the wings and the delicate webbing are more similar to a dragonfly's wings. It's great that phones double as cameras now. You can get amazing reference while you're in your own backyard. I like using both photography and video because there are unique benefits to both. With video, I can see how the shapes interact in the environment and lighting. I can even capture things like sounds. I love this video of a grasshopper, where you can see how his tiny wings vibrate to make such lovely music. But I can't get the same crisp detail in video that I can get in a still image. So if you see something interesting, I find it helpful to get both photo and video reference. And just keep a folder on your computer so that you have this growing library of material. I'm going to use Payne's Gray to paint some shadows in. These darker areas just make the bright highlights even more pronounced. I have a rag with me that I use to wipe the paint off my brush if I want to use a new color on the same brush. Up until now, I've been letting everything mix, and I haven't worried about wiping my brush off, but in this case, I don't want my white highlights to mix with the Payne's Gray pigment on my pointed round brush. I'm going to start on my final detail pass and focus on repainting and redefining my highlights. I'm still using titanium white thinned with a little walnut oil. I'm going to continue to follow the shape and flow of the veins of the wing using both quick dotted strokes and long broad strokes. Any areas that appear too brightly can be diffused using my angled shader. I'm going to start thinking about the individual cells as well now and paint those into the larger areas of the wing near the base. Those can also be dabbed back using the angled shader brush. The last thing I'm going to do is dot in some specular highlights using nickel titanium yellow. I just want to pick out real points of interest that would be reflecting the light the most. I'm using a new angled shader to blot these areas because I don't want a brush that has pigment on it already to muddy these details. I'm adding titanium white highlights as well to give these areas a chromatic effect. Remember in the reference photo how the specular highlights were several different colors. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. I mentioned in an earlier post about how this painting is actually only one in 14 new paintings that will be appearing in a new board game entitled Lizard Wizards. I'm really excited to begin sharing all of the art with you. I've been keeping this project quiet for a long time now. Anyway, as always, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for new tutorials, let me know in the comments below. I have a backlog of tutorial suggestions from you guys, so don't worry if I haven't gotten to your suggestion just yet. I'll be sure to cover it in future tutorials.